Hello, Garland Nixon here with Jamarl Thomas. And by the way, it's also playing, this is also playing on Jamarl Thomas's channel. So if you're on his channel watching it, make sure you come over and become a member of my channel. If you're on my channel watching it, make sure you go over and become a member of his channel. Jamarl has a great show every morning from 7 to 10. I watch it, has lots of great guests. I like it. I watch it every single morning. So,
thanks,
I'm fumbling around, getting my act together, and I always have that on. Because it's a lot of good stuff, interesting guests, and I love great guests. I think you had Glenn Deason the other day, I think. A lot of interesting people. Anyway, let's get rolling. Let us get rolling. Some things that I think are of consequence that need to be discussed. Let's start here. And this is something I find interesting. Want to get your thoughts on. So I'm reading these articles about Trump cutting money to Ukraine, wherever, and people are going back. Well, did he cut military? Did he not cut the military? And I find out that he did cut all this foreign money, USAID, stuff like that. And it comes out that 90% of Ukraine's independent media is funded by the U.S. 90%.
Wait. Say that word again. Independent media?
Yes. All Ukraine props to the Kiev Post, all of the media in Ukraine, right? It comes out that they're all going bananas, but he did not, because apparently he didn't cut all the military aid, but he cut the other kind of aid, the USAID, and they're all getting money from USAID. So the bottom line is, I'm told by the Biden administration, we've got to stand up for an independent, sovereign Ukraine. It's nothing without Ukraine. We can't make decisions without Ukraine. We can't make deals without Ukraine. Ukraine must be in the room. Ukraine is calling the shots. 90% of their media is paid for by the U.S.
Just astonishing. This is the one of the articles. Let's see if this is right. Let's see, because I got this. I had pulled this article because I was astonished by this. Because if you think about it, what's happening? Like if you think the way the stories would run, they would say, "Oh, here it is. A story will get picked up, and when that story gets picked up, can I show it? Is it showing?
Okay. There we go.
Oh, okay. When the story gets picked up in Ukrainian media, eventually it migrates to U.S. media. Okay, but understand when it migrates to U.S. media, if we are paying all of this media, meaning if we are funding 90% of that media, then the U.S. media is really only picking up what the State Department wants it to know, because that is what the State Department is going to put on in regards to U.S. media. I mean, in Ukrainian media, do we honestly believe that the State Department paying for 90% has zero influence on what is being put out in Ukraine? And what does it mean if the U.S. media is just homing in on whatever Ukrainian media is saying, especially since Ukrainian media is just being paid for by us? Just outrageous. That number is astonishing, 90%.
You know what it reminds me of? Because like you said, because here's the game. I don't know how many stories that I saw, and it was referred to according to the Ukrainian media, according to Ukrainian propster, according to the Kiev, blah, 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 right? Then we would get these numbers. Yes, 90 million North Korean soldiers were killed according to Ukrainian media. You know what I mean? For North Koreans, they're running all over the place. There's no Russians left. They've all been, you know what I mean? So we would get these stories that seemed over the top. Right. And we'd be like, yeah, it kind of really doesn't seem believable. The numbers, things like that. But it wasn't us. Don't blame us. This all came from Ukrainian, totally independent Ukrainian media. We got to trust those people. You know what it reminds me of? And we've seen this. You remember the weapons of mass destruction when they found out that the Cheney people had leaked this story to the New York Times. And then they referred the story during Russiagate. They leaked this story about Trump and Russia to the New York Times, and they used that to help get the FISA warrant against Carter Page, right? So they give the story to the media, and then they're like, hey, my God, look at this. A totally independent story from the New York Times. This was the entire game plan in Ukraine. 90% of the media
Dick Cheney did the same thing, if you remember, during
Yes.
weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Dick Cheney would have these kind of back channel communications. I believe it was the New York Times, Judith Miller, I believe.
Yes.
And in these back channel communications, she would say, I have an anonymous source. Okay, that anonymous source was Dick Cheney. And then Dick Cheney would go into the media and he would be like, I was reading the pages of the New York Times, and the New York Times said so and so and so and so, effectively referencing himself because nobody knew that he was the anonymous source. That is basically what they're doing in Ukraine. All of this media is coming out. And some people can say, well, but they're independent media. Dude, okay, so it's RT and Sputnik independent media also. It's BBC independent media. Like, this is not independent media if we're paying for it.
Right. And, we were both at Sputnik and they closed down. Oh, Sputnik's up to no good. And I always said this. It says right on the sign. Yes. Radio Sputnik. RT. You can look at it and say, well, I understand that it's being funded by Russia and that some of the perspectives are certainly, I'll put it like this. They hired me, but I wouldn't say I'm a pro-Russian or anti-Russian person. I'm pro-truth. Yep. And if it's true, it's true. If it's false, it's false. And I found a lot of lies about Russia, but lies about China, lies about Iran. It doesn't matter to me. The truth is what it is. But they would be like, well, Sputnik, it's a Russian bot. And how do we know? Because it's funded by Russia, right? Well, wait a minute. What they lied to us. In fact, you know what it is? I think there's criminality involved here because they knew, I'll put it like this. They planted stories. They own these people. Mm-hmm. And then it came back to us. And what we kept hearing was, well, they're just going by what Ukraine tells them. There was, you know what it is? There was never Ukraine. Ukraine was gone. It disappeared.
Yeah. At that point, it was just the U.S. It's just so wild. There has to be an investigation into the amount of money that we were dropping. Joe Biden was throwing money out of helicopters. We're talking about like $300 billion that they effectively put into that country. And what we're seeing now with this kind of funding freeze is they're freaking out. It's almost like this kind of weird level of desperation because what we're realizing is we were paying for everything. Like, their pensions, healthcare, all of that stuff was effectively coming out of our tax dollars. And, any functioning government would start looking into how was this money spent? Was this money used in the way that they said this money was being used? And from my understanding, they're seeing these kind of bizarre accounting associated with the way Joe Biden was effectively putting money into this cause. So I deeply hope that they have an investigation. And one last point. Do you remember when Donald Trump said something? He was opining one day and he said, Joe Biden pardoned all of these people. And he says, maybe at the end of it all, he should have pardoned himself, effectively saying you pardon all of these people, but you might be involved in criminality yourself in regards to the stuff. Yeah, man, that number is astonishing. 90%.
Yeah, that when I saw that, a lot of things have happened over the course of Ukraine conflict, and we pointed to different things, and I was suspicious of things and all that. And I knew, the U.S. does the whole NGO soft power. I knew that. Okay, fair enough. And before I had known that before the conflict started, Victoria Nuland said, oh, yes, we pumped $5 billion into Ukraine, right? I knew all this stuff, right? And I knew, okay, they got some NGOs there. They got some fake websites, some media, things like that, right? But looking at that, Ukraine had nothing. There was nothing in Ukraine. You know what else that tells me? And this is something that I think is important. I was talking to Scott Ritter about it. There was this website called Mirrored Vets. And they kept putting names of people that they wanted to kill. I'm shocked our names weren't on there. Yep. But there were names of, and they were like Wyatt Reed's name was on at one time.
Ritter was on that list.
A senator, what's that?
Ritter was on that list.
Ritter was on that list. Rand Paul was on that, and they killed people, and then they would put whatever their, beside their name, right? Liquidated over their name after they killed them, right? If there was no media, if there was nothing, there got to be an investigation into that site because that was a damn U.S. site. That was U.S. state. That was the Biden administration putting. There's no way that the Biden administration didn't either have input or have to clear everything that went to that site. There's no possible way that that was some Ukrainian. And let me add this: the fact that 90% of everything going into their media tells me, at minimum, they didn't have any money. We were funding it. So the Biden administration was funding a site that said, I want to kill an American senator amongst other Americans.
Yeah, and putting money into the country that says they want to do that. I mean, like that is astonishing. I am surprised that we weren't on that list. I felt some kind of way that they didn't have my name on that list, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. But yeah, they had all sorts of Americans on that list. And look, whether the Biden administration knew anything about it in a sense of hand-holding, certainly we had influence in regards to what they were putting out, and they weren't necessarily going to put out anything that went in a particular direction or contrary to the direction that they wanted. Also, keep in mind, one of the things that Zelensky did was to get rid of opposition parties. Yes. So opposition media, opposition parties, all of those things were eliminated right off the bat. So
at the very beginning, yes.
So they didn't have an opposition media, for all intents and purposes, or for all of this talk about we believe in independent media and we want nonsense.
I'll go further. Now you look, so the war starts and Zelensky says all opposition parties are outlawed, all opposition medias are outlawed, and we're going to have one television station and it's going to be 24 hours a day. And I've read about it. It was just nonstop war propaganda. Yeah, that wasn't Zelensky. Zelensky was following orders. You know what I mean? That was Blinken, Biden, et cetera, who said, okay, we got the war going. What do you want to do? Here's what we need you to do. Get rid of all of these parties. And that, I believe, that was a State Department plan, that the State Department just said, I mean, let's face it, they were paying for all of the media. Could Zelensky reorganize the entire media for the country without the people that were paying 90% of it?
I think every incentive in the world went for the coup regime to get rid of anything that would oppose the coup, whether that was political leaders, whether that was media that was contrary to it, or anything else. I mean, at that point, anything that was Russian became radioactive in the way that they were functioning. I mean, if you remember, when Zelensky got in, the premise that he got in on was a peace ticket. We don't have to have this war with Russia. We don't have to be at conflict. We don't have to be in contest with the Russian language. I mean, for God's sake, Zelensky speaks Russian. He speaks Russian better than he speaks anything else. And so it's like, the coup government that gets in at that point needs to get rid of any and everything, all of these kind of previous vestiges of any notion of a democratic order or any kind of notion of independence in the government. How could you keep independence in a government that you've just overthrown, right? And so, no, I'm not. And then to add to it, the State Department goes in and creates these kind of, what they call them, corruption organizations, these organizations that were supposed to go after corruption. Well, of course, the only thing they're going after is their opposition under the guise of going after corruption. So, no, obviously the U.S. had a lot to do with this. Obviously, we're paying for their government. We're paying for their war. Zelensky, at some point, at the very least, wanted to have a peace deal. They wouldn't even let him go for a peace deal. I mean, this is by their own statements. I mean, Naftali Bennett points this out. You get other sources in Ukraine pointing this out, that at the end of the day, there was a peace agreement that was real, the Istanbul process, and it was scuttled by the U.S., Boris Johnson, and you even get Victoria Nuland pointing out, well, we didn't like the terms. Okay, well, who the hell are you? And you're talking about like 500,000 dead Ukrainians later, with all of this land being carved up and everything else. This is a travesty. And yeah, we own it. We own it.
I've said for a while, I don't know how Zelensky gets out of this thing because, and I mean that in an existential way.
Yeah.
Because he just knows too much. And as much as he knows, there's a lot of people that don't want him to talk. And that's not a good situation to be in if you're Zelensky.
You know what's wild about this? So I just got an article today. It was a little bit earlier this morning. I think it was 21st Century Wire pointed out that Zelensky could be prosecuted for Nord Stream. Now, this is astonishing to me. Because the reality of it is, Joe Biden, it's clear that it was the United States that blew up that pipeline. When Joe Biden comes out and says, if Russia goes in, we're going to stop the pipeline. And the woman is like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean you're going to stop the pipeline? It's not your pipeline. How are you going to stop a pipeline that you don't own? And he said, we'll stop it. Okay, so somebody has to explain to me that unless Joe Biden is a psychic, then Joe Biden did it. If I predict that, on this date, this bank is going to be robbed, and the bank gets robbed, the first question the cops are going to ask, how did you know the bank was going to get robbed? How did you know that? Who told you that? Did you do it? Did you know somebody who did it? Meaning, the moment that you make a prediction like that, it is so random for you to say that a pipeline that will work in perpetuity up until the point where it stops, it's going to just so happen to stop and stop randomly. Okay, well, I'm going to say that you did it. Unless you tell me that you're a psychic who got remote viewers on staff. All right, fast forward. You get the situation where they started to blame. They started to blame Ukraine for this, saying it was a bunch of Ukrainians in a dinghy that went out and just said, "Hey, let's screw it. Let's fuck it. Let's do the pipeline." And then the story was so ludicrous, they started adding more stuff to it, saying that they were businessmen and that these businessmen were just kind of hanging out one day, and they decided that they were going to pay for this blowing up the pipeline. And they did it this way because they were trying to preserve the integrity of the Ukrainian government, to make it look as if the Ukrainian government had nothing to do with it. But then they implicated like Zaluzhny and some other guy that was already in jail as being responsible for it. Okay, now this comes full circle. Zaluzhny, apparently behind the scenes, there was conversations where they were trying to say, look, we don't want you to run in the upcoming election. And if you do run in the upcoming election, we will prosecute you, or we will find something to prosecute you with. This is Zelensky's way of trying to preserve political power. Okay, well, now the story comes out. Zaluzhny may be prosecuted for Nord Stream blowing up. It's like, okay, I see what you guys did there. I see how that happens. I see how that happens. That's astonishing. Like, I mean, for one, they send a guy to the UK to get him out of Ukraine because they know that if there's an election, Zaluzhny will most likely win, as Zelensky is becoming somewhat radioactive. And in this case, this is their way of trying to preserve political power. I mean, I guess the question becomes, I am super curious whether they have an election in Ukraine. And I am also super curious on whether or not Zelensky runs in that election. And he has a chance of winning that election. And if Zaluzhny is on the ballot, Zelensky is going to lose. Now, give me your take on that, by the way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. I don't see, we'll have to see how this thing plays out, because I think either it plays out with a deal where Trump and other people get some kind of a diplomatic deal, or Trump just walks away and lets it wither on the vine and lets this thing fall apart. What's interesting is this.
That's what he's doing now.
Yeah, we all thought this. Well, and Putin said it, everybody. Well, if Trump yanks the military rug out from under Ukraine, it'll fall apart, right? But we forgot he's yanked the other part of the rug under, the part that pays for media, the part that pays for the salaries of everybody, the part that keeps the lights on, the part that pays the pensions. You know what I mean? So yeah, the military people may still have a few bullets and stuff, but what happens in a country when it's the first of the month and the pensioners don't get the pensions, right? And the people that need to be paid for fuel don't get their fuel, so they're not delivering fuel. And that, you know what I mean? When you basically take the infrastructure out from under a country, and they couldn't it would have been, from a public relations perspective, it would have been a disaster for them to just come out and say, well, we're paying, although some of us knew it, most of America didn't know, we're paying for every damn thing for this country. We have adopted them. They are a stepchild, right? So in a way, it's kind of smart. You turn off everything. Yeah, the guys got bullets on the front lines, but the rest of the country collapses. And 45 days, the rest of this country will collapse. So realistically, the Trump people can say, we'll negotiate in 30 to 45 days. The rest of the whole country, what's going to happen? The people are in the street screaming, where's our check? Where's our this? Where's our that? And what are they going to say? Trump, please, you got to give us the money back. At that point, Trump says, funny you should say that. I think I can get a deal with the Russians. You sign right here that you're going to go along with this deal, and I ain't giving you your money back anyway. You
Yeah.
he ain't giving it back. They're
pushing them into a deal. Yeah, he's pushing them into it.
But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he's pushing them into it. I think, this whole, because it's almost like he's letting them down the vine. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be too hard on it. I realize I don't have any leverage against the Russians. Fair enough. Zelensky is going to scream and holler bloody murder if I try to push him into a peace deal. Okay, fair enough. Let it ride. Let it ride. And, if he is getting any real information, then he knows the speed at which Russia on the battlefield, they're increasing their speed. The Russian military is getting more lethal as Ukraine gets weaker. Ukraine has a manpower disadvantage at this point that is getting that much more significant. The fact that they know that Donald Trump is coming in and he wants to end the war means that there are more desertions on the front lines, because who the hell wants to be the last person to die in a losing war? And so if you are Trump and you know this and you realize I need to get Europe and I need to get Ukraine on board for some kind of deal and some kind of reorganization of Europe that's coming up, maybe the best thing to do is nothing. Let them down the vine. I would imagine they're not necessarily, I don't think the Russians are going to want to go to Poland or, to the Polish border, but especially, I would imagine they wouldn't necessarily want to take Western Ukraine either. But there may be a sweet spot where a deal can be made. And, there's even this thing. I mean, Karl Gurgetscu, the one from Romania, was saying that effectively that the Ukraine is going to be dismembered, that Poland, Hungary, Romania are effectively going to take back portions of Ukraine that used to belong to them in the first place, especially at the point where they're a beaten country, especially if they get to the point where the military collapses, which, we're getting to that point.
So you remember Putin said that earlier. Do you remember that? We were Sputnik. We reported that not long after the conflict happened. Putin said at one of his speeches, he said, at some point, the other powers are going to come in and all try to take. I don't know if you remember. They said at some point they're all going to come in and they're going to try to carve it up and take their own part. And here's the thing about it. We've all been thinking of this from the perspective of, is Trump going to cut off military aid? And what happens if he cuts off military aid? We forgot he's paying are paying for everything else. So let's say you're Trump or whoever it is. Let's say you're okay. You want a deal. You got Russia, you got Ukraine here, right? And you say, okay. And people say, you have no leverage with Russia. And he says, yeah, I got no leverage with Russia, but I got leverage with Ukraine. Well, can you cut off their military? Well, I got too much heat on me. I can't do that. However, we're also paying for everything else, aren't we? Yeah, we'll cut that off. Boom, cut that off, yank the rug out from under. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And let's face it, if you cut off the military, I don't know how much they got, but again, it may be faster to collapse if you cut off everything else than it would be with the military. You know what I mean? Because apparently Europe is still going to send them some bullets or tanks or whatever they got left. Europe can shove that into them, but Europe is broke. They got no money. So really, it may make them come unglued a lot faster, losing their money. And what's going to happen in the winter? They're running out of gas. They're running out of food. They're running out. You know what's going to happen? Massive refugees are going to start crossing the damn border into Poland and wherever else they can without this. And Zelensky's in a bad situation because he can always make the argument, we're fighting the Russians when we need more weapons. But he can't really make the argument, we need more money. What for? Well, we got to pay our people. You guys got to pay. We got to pay pensions. Americans are going to go bananas if he says to Trump, we need more money. What for? We got to pay the Ukrainian pensions. And Americans are going to say, what the hell about our pensions? Bad PR. Trump can easily say, there's no way we're going to pay your pensions, man, going about your business. Oh, we ain't paying for your oil and gas. We're not paying for your subsidy. We're not paying for any of that crap now. Weapons, we got to send you. If you see what I'm saying, it's like the best possible scenario for Trump to do is to yank that side.
Yeah, he's checking that to Europe. And like you said, Europe doesn't have the money. I mean, for God's sake, the German government collapsed over the issue of funding Ukraine. The French government is already an economic disaster. And so we'll see what takes place, especially with the election coming up in in February for Germany. And by the way, there's another angle to this.
Okay.
By Trump putting a freeze on a lot of the money that's going out, if we're paying that much, 90% for Ukraine, imagine how much we're paying for some of these NGOs in some of these other countries. Georgia, great example. Georgia, Romania, what's the other one? Hungary. Yeah. So like there are these protests in these countries where they're effectively going after governments, Fico in Slovakia, where they're trying to go after governments that are, let's say, resistant to this kind of war party stuff. And being resistant to the war party stuff, you have all of a sudden this pressure that springs up in this kind of color revolution-esque way. Georgia is probably one of the best examples where, like, I think it was like 30% of the people the cops arrested weren't even Georgian.
Right.
And the president of Georgia, the French-born spy, I call her a spook, working at the behest of the European Union against her own government that she's supposed to be ethically, legally bound to protect. You know, all of these groups are being paid by somebody. And you would imagine USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all of this money that goes into all of these NGOs. I would be super curious on how much of that money is flowing into either Hungary, flowing into either Georgia, flowing into Slovakia, flowing into Romania, that is directly related to some of the protests were taking place that were against those governments. I mean, Romania is a little bit different just because they literally annulled the election when the guy was going to win. I mean, that's just...
They didn't try to hide that one.
Yeah, they didn't hide that. They said they were TikTok videos about the Russians. Come to find out it was a liberal party. Then put out the TikTok videos, and they annulled an election over that nonsense. Just outrageous. But in the other cases, though, where you have these protests that are going against the government, effectively, you know, we want more war in Ukraine. Why aren't you supporting our war in Ukraine? I would be super curious on how much of the money is flowing from the U.S. into those coffers. It's just fascinating.
Looks like none now. Now, here's another one. Another thing that we've discussed in the past, and that is, you know, when the smoke clears, and if they do any investigation, some of the dirt, God knows what they're going to find when it comes to the Biden administration. But recently, let me get your take on this. Tucker Carlson pops up, and he says something that's quite alarming, to say the least. He says the Biden administration tried to off Putin. That he didn't say they were thinking about it. He said they tried to, and he said that's insane. All agreed. And you know what? Tucker Carlson, if you look at his history, he hasn't. I can't find something that Tucker Carlson said, especially big, that I can say, well, that was a lie. You know what I mean? I can see that he got fired for bringing on Julian Assange and Jimmy Dore and people like that. Sure. But I can't say where he made some, you know, and in recent years, you know, he's been talking to Lavrov and Putin and different things like that. I just don't think that he would say something of that magnitude unless he had something substantive behind it. But that's pretty horrifying, because if they do that, we probably all die.
I don't know where Tucker is getting that from. I just don't know where Tucker is getting it from. Like he just kind of said it, but he didn't attribute it to anything. I mean, keep in mind, Tucker Carlson got Fox sued for what, like $40 million?
Yeah.
When he was saying something, it was like saying the stuff behind the scenes, and then he go on air and say something different. Look, I agree with you. He has been really good at pointing out, okay, why are we fighting these wars? This is nonsense. And like you said, talk to Lavrov, talking to Putin. He's been willing to have these conversations.
You know, he's tight with Trump, actually. He's traveled with Trump, and Trump listens to him. So I'm just saying, he may have some places that he got this from. Yeah,
I'm just curious on where he got that from. Like, is this an interpretation that he's doing? Did he hear this from somebody? Like, because I do know at one point Joe Biden was like, well, somebody get rid of this guy, talking about Putin.
And remember Graham? Remember Lindsey Graham saying he has to be. Now, let's do this. Okay, it's possible that it's not true. At this point, we don't know. But let's have just a brief, let me get your thoughts. If it comes to pass that the Biden, might I add this, that is in fact an act of war, right? Which would be a violation of the Constitution, because only the Congress can declare war. So you'd be an act of war without a declaration of war again. But my point is, we're done. You know, if you do that, the Russians are going to blow up some of our bases, probably hit the White House with an Oreshnik missile.
Oh
At
man,
that point,
lose their
all
mind.
hell's breaking loose. That's it. It's going to
Yeah,
end up in a nuclear war. Anyway, your thoughts
it's an act
on
of war.
if that's true?
It's an act
What
of
does it
war.
mean?
I mean, it's an obvious act of war, right? Like when Joe Biden gave that speech, and he said something like, "Will somebody get rid of this guy?" or something like that. And if you remember, Europe freaked out. They freaked out because they saw their life pass before their eyes. Like the notion, like how would we behave? Let's say it wasn't even our president. Let's say they killed John Kerry. Okay, what would the United States do in response to them killing
Oh,
John
throw
Kerry?
all kind of missiles at him.
We'd lose our minds. We'd lose our minds. And I would imagine just for this notion of maintaining credibility, Russia would obviously respond. I mean, it wouldn't even be a second thought. It wouldn't be a second thought. They would respond exactly like we would respond.
Yeah, it's horrifying. If it turns out to be true, again, the people should be prosecuted. Oh, here's the other thing he said. Your thoughts on this? And this is, to me, something that makes it even more credible. He said, for the last couple of years, Tony Blinken was running stuff.
That I
Remember
believe.
He said
That
not.
I believe.
He said not Biden. He said Blinken was running everything.
I believe that. That I do believe. Because if you think about like all the policies that they were running with, okay, well, it was Blinken that kept showing up in the Middle East. So it's like, I am a Jew and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Or, well, the reason I bring that up, because that's so outlandish. Like you're sent, like for one, it's anti-Semitic. You're sent to represent U.S. interests. And while you are there, supposedly representing U.S. interests, you feel the need to tell the Muslim community that you are there as a Jew. And it's like, okay, dude, you're supposed to be there as an American, not necessarily a Jew. You're supposed to be there as an American looking for U.S. interests. This idea that you're doing this kind of dual loyalty stuff and you're putting that dual loyalty out on the front is problematic in general. Even if it is true, you shouldn't say it. It's just outlandish. If you look at the policy of firing missiles into Russia, now Joe Biden could have gotten to that policy, but there were other parts of that where Joe Biden seemed like he was being gamed. Like, do you remember when Keir Starmer was coming to the United States?
Yes.
And the belief was that, at least the way that the media was reporting it, was that Joe Biden was going to give approval to Zelensky to fire missiles into Ukraine at the time where Keir Starmer was coming into the country. When Putin came out and was like, I will end the world if you do this. In which case, Joe Biden at that time was like, scuttled it, didn't allow it to happen. And when he was talking to the British media, he was very pissed off at the British media. It seemed as if he was being maneuvered. He realized he was being maneuvered and it was very pissed off at the fact that he was being maneuvered, in which case it looked like Blinken for the moment was sidelined. Eventually, Blinken got around to firing missiles back in Ukraine. I can totally believe that Blinken was running point on a lot of the strategy.
I did want to ask you your thoughts on the and we get that. Well, we got some things to hit on this. Confirmation hearings.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
before we get into the details, I said this. I was watching AOC on one of these. I don't know, Jon Stewart, whatever the hell, some neoliberal schmuck, right?
Yeah.
And here's what she was talking about Trump. I'm listening. She goes, yes, and he's violating the norms. And I thought, whoa, miss, I'm a socialist. I'm pushing back against the system. I'm fighting. Now you are defending the norms. Well, first of all, most Americans seem to have voted on November 5th. They don't like the norms.
Yep.
When Luigi plugged that poor bastard from United Healthcare, people were like, yeah, good. You shot the norms. You know what I mean? And when you watch this thing, whether it was Tulsi, we'll get into it, whether it was Tulsi or RFK Jr., they were defending corporations.
Yes.
They were defending intelligence. The Democratic Party is the party of the, quote, norms, which is the status quo, the establishment, cut and dried. I mean, their mask off moment.
Yep. Yep. Mark Kelly is a really good example. When Tulsi is giving testimony, Mark Kelly, God, man, that was one of the weirdest responses. Mark Kelly is questioning Tulsi, and he says something to the effect of, it sounded like you were repeating things that were coming out of Russia and Syria about regime change wars. And he went on this long thing. Tulsi made the point of saying, look, I was a soldier in this military. We went over into Iraq to fight. We were fighting terrorists. That's what we were doing. And so the notion that the Obama administration is funding and backing jihadists to overthrow the Syrian government is outlandish. And she was fantastic. At the end of that, you would think that the person was like, whoa, wait a minute. You mean we were backing jihadists? That's real? No, his response is, yeah, I get that. But you said it. Like, it's like, meaning it's not about it being true. I accept that it's true. My issue is that you mentioned it. You brought it up. And it's like, okay, you're embarrassing. Like, that is astonishing. Like, the Democratic Party has become everything wrong with the way government operates in regards to this kind of orthodoxy, pro-war, endless war. I mean, this was kind of the issue with Harris, right? Where she's attacking in one of the debates between J.D. Vance and Mike Waltz. It took Vance to tell Waltz that, look, diplomacy is not a dirty word. The fact that you have to articulate that, though, is pretty astonishing, especially to a Democratic Party where, some of these people are supposed to be anti-war. Ostensibly, they're not. I mean, I've had on Dane McAdams, and I remember Dane McAdams pointed out that the Ron Paul Institute used to be able to work with lefties at some point. And he said somewhere along the way, that was no longer the case. That was nobody that they can work with. They were just alone in the political space, trying to push back against these kind of wars. No, you're absolutely right. These hearings have been astonishing.
We're going to get back to the hearings, but I wanted to show you this. I just saw it today. A lot of people might not have saw it. Democratic Party handed polling blow on heels of second Trump term, right? They're facing a harsh reality, blah, blah, blah.
Hard reality.
Let's look at this. Okay, here's the polls. Quinnipiac poll. 31% of voters have a favorable view of the Democratic Party compared to 57% holding an unfavorable view. Well, this aligns with how bad they lost. Yep. The highest percentage of voters having an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party since the poll began asking this question. The poll shows 22% of voters have a favorable view of the Democratic Party, 59% an unfavorable view. It's men, 22% favorable view versus 67 with an unfavorable view.
Wow.
While 39% of women have a favorable view, 47 unfavorable view, right? So I'm getting some margin of error and all of that. But anyway, let me get your reaction to that. In light of this.
That's that.
The Democrats don't seem to feel that they lost.
30%. 30%. Think of how low that is. 30%. This is supposed to be the party of the working class, right? And yet they lost the working class vote. And I have not seen any come to Jesus moment. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Have you, like, every blue moon, you see somebody who's like, okay, we are doing something wrong. We're fundamentally missing something in the way that we're operating. I'm not seeing that, though, among the Democrats at large. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, you know what? Every now and time somebody does it, the rest of the Democrats attack them. If you remember, what did they came out? Why did we lose? We lost because these people are all racist and sexist and misogynist, right? Yep. And here's another one. We lost because on Twitter, Elon Musk manipulated the algorithm. I saw something that said like 2% of Black people are on Twitter. You know what I mean? So you know what I mean? And they got like, some states got 25% of Black males, and Trump got like 20% nationwide. That 2% on Twitter ain't getting it done. It ain't all men. You know what I mean? It's like they reverted back to 2017 when Trump won, right? I see all these Democrats and they're starting, can you believe what Trump, you see it online, what Trump's doing? He said this, he did this. We got to stand up against him. Where's my crocheted pink hat? Let's take to the street. You know what I mean? And I'm like, guys, it ain't 2017.
No,
Trump
it's not.
didn't win in a close, I know Black people that voted for Trump that don't like him. They're like, well, things are too expensive and the Democrats, they're crap. And some of them, it was the trans stuff. People tell me that freaked them out a little bit. You know how Black men are. You're in the community. Some of them aren't maybe quite where they need to be when it comes to those kind of issues, if we're honest. You know what I mean? Cultural honesty here. But my point is, there was a number of things that the Democrats did that pushed some of their traditional constituents away. Most of it had to do with economics, and then a lot had to do with foreign policy, Gaza, etc. Here's my point. But none of them will admit that. And now that afterwards, all I see basically is something to the effect of it was stolen. We got to stand up and fight against Trump because he's a madman. And they're still going back to the MAGA people are just a few racist white people from Mississippi or something. That's all a MAGA. It's craziness.
Yeah. There's no come to Jesus moment. There's no kind of, okay, we're getting strong. We lost the working class. We're supposed to be the party of the working class, and yet we lost the working class. Meaning there's no like honest assessment. There's no even curiosity about it. It's like we're more moral. Trump is a liar. And, you know, you can see it in these hearings. Like when you're looking at some of the questions Democrats hate Gabbard. And it is a level of derangement that is astonishing. Same thing with RFK, both of which are Democrats. Like, you know, it's like both of these people, I think both of them will probably say, we didn't leave the Democratic Party left us because they went fucking insane.
They're heretics. They're heretics, man. That's the way they view them. They hate them the worst.
Yeah. I mean, the way they're talking about, I mean, it blows me away that somebody would say, you guys are backing jihadists to take over a government and knowing what they're going to do and knowing full well that we were literally fighting this group in Iraq. And you sent me over there to fight this group in Iraq. And you get, yeah, I get that. But why did you say it? Like, it's like, I get all of that. But why did you tell the American public that? Why did you mention that? And then you got that other lunatic screaming when you call Edward Snowden a traitor, to which he would not do so. Because he's not a traitor. Like, if Congress is doing something grotesquely illegal, or let's say the intelligence community is doing something grotesquely illegal, like spying on the American public, then the intelligence community is committing a crime against the American public. The guy who tells you that they're committing a crime is not the bad guy.
Right.
That's not the bad guy. I'm sorry. It's not. And the idea that they're screaming at Gabbard saying, won't you call him a traitor? Won't you call him a traitor? The guy who exposed to the American public that the government was spying on them is not the bad guy. It's the government that was breaking the law in that situation. That is the bad guy. They're so twisted.
Her answer was like really professional, and for considering where she was, I thought it was a good answer. Would you like to hear other things? But I understand she's in a Senate hearing and she's got to walk a very thin line, right? So that's she's like, what he did was illegal and it shouldn't be tolerated or praised, whatever. She said, but he exposed illegality by the government of, against the American people, spying on people. So she basically, and I'm thinking, well, but the position that she's asking to be in, she's got to acknowledge that it was illegal, and it was illegal. But she was kind of making a point. What was he supposed to do? Come to you bastards? Like, you're going to act it? But she said, but he exposed a crime, and they were like, well, you called him a hero. Do you think he's a hero? She wouldn't answer that. He violated the law, but he exposed violations of the law. And it sounded like what she was really saying was, I always say what my dad used to always, you say, an even swap ain't no swindle, right? It sounded like she was really saying, look, he violated the law. He violated the law. As they say in football, offsetting penalties replay the down. You know what I mean? Yeah. Look, did he do it was illegal, but he caught you bastards illegal. Let's just forget it, bring him home, pardon him, and we'll start over again. I think it sounded to me that she didn't say that, but she was implying, no, the man didn't. Come on. He exposed you She made sure to say and she said he exposed violating the law, both in foreign policy and what did she say? She also said violating the constitutional rights of Americans. So she make it clear in a way. She didn't say, I think he's a hero, but she put forth an argument that his actions were heroic, I think.
Well, yeah, she's trying to be director of national intelligence, which is basically the head body for accumulating all of the intelligence in the United States for all of these three alphabet soup agencies. Obviously, she's going to be in charge of ensuring the integrity of U.S. intelligence in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be her job. So it would be kind of weird. I mean, it would put her in a Patel, like the Kash Patel, when Adam Schiff, who I deeply dislike, but he was completely right with Patel, because it's like, dude, you're trying to head up the FBI. How are you trying to head up the FBI while simultaneously being okay with these people, attacking the Capitol on January 6th? They were out there beating cops. How are you okay with that? And you want to be the top cop. So I get that. Gabbard's position was more so like, look, the government was behaving illegally. And she pointed out, I remember she even said something like, he could have, or he should have went to you or your intelligence, body in order to identify problems associated with what they were doing. But let's be honest. You and I both know the government would not have done anything about it.
No, they'd have killed him or prosecuted him or something.
They probably would have prosecuted him.
They always look. We can ask John Kiriakou or Scott Ritter or any other of them, Julian Assange, what they do with whistleblowers. We already know how that works.
Well, it depends on the whistleblower, right? If it's whistleblowing in favor of something that state wants, zero issue. State is perfectly fine if you're whistleblowing about something that they want to accomplish. If you are whistleblowing on Manafort, and you are releasing information from Ukraine in order to come into the U.S. to go after Manafort, no issue with that. They love that. That's perfectly fine. If you are airing the fact of, let's say, torture, or if you're airing like John Kiriakou did, in which case they end up putting him in a cage, despite the fact that, again, torture is against the law. This notion that Snowden could have filed a form, and then after he filed the form, he would have went to some random person in Congress and he would explain what was going on, and the random person in Congress was going to take it very seriously and went after the abuses. Nonsense. Just nonsense. I mean, Brennan, Clapper, both lied to Congress under oath. And no consequences for it. Yeah. Yes, she did. Yes,
she brought that up.
Yes, she did. Basically, Brennan spied on Congress.
Really? I just thought about this. When she said, basically Brennan lied to Congress. No, she said Clapper lied to Congress.
Right.
And then she said Brennan, she said, when this committee was investigating Brennan, when he was with the CIA, he spied illegally and broke into the computers on this committee. And here's what she said. And he wasn't held accountable. She punched him right in the face. She said, you bastards are corrupt. He violated the law and you did nothing. You're corrupt. You know what I mean? I mean, let's face it. She called them and they're just sitting there, usually, smirked and all. She's like, yes, he did this against this committee. And they're all like, they're looking at their watches. They're checking their cell phone. They're fidgeting around nervously. She called the bastards out.
I remember the testimony when Brennan was giving the testimony and the guy was raking him over the coals saying effectively, you broke into our account. If I remember correctly, it was on the torture stuff.
Yeah.
The CIA, if they wanted to know what was Congress looking at, what that committee was looking at in regards to the CIA's torture thing. And I think there was Obama comes out and said we tortured some folks and was pretty cavalier about the fact that we were effectively breaking people. And so, yeah, Tulsi got, and I guess that makes my point even clearer, right? It's like this notion that if Edward Snowden did everything right, that Congress would have gotten really assertive and gotten involved. I mean, we're saying Edward Snowden. Nobody knew who Edward Snowden was at the time. Snowden was a nobody. He was just a person who was a functionary doing a particular job. But he was horrified by some of the stuff that he was effectively saying. Chelsea Manning, same thing. Like those people who got prosecuted for leaking stuff to like The Guardian or leaking stuff to Julian Assange or to The Intercept. Those people didn't get this, oh, they're giving us information that we really need to know and illegality by the US government. It was, why are you talking about this? And that was the exact same thing that they asked Tulsi Gabbard when she brought up the fact we are knocking over governments. We are engaging in regime change wars that are spending all of this money. We're getting nothing out of this short of putting jihadists in charge of countries. And it's like, yeah. But why are you telling people that? It would have been the exact same thing. Why are you telling us this? Why are you telling us this?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is, and this is interesting, and I'll say this is why I want Kash Patel to become in charge, because he hates the Russiagate stuff, and he's done a lot of work Russiagate stuff on it, and that's one of the big things that pisses me off. But
Yeah,
That being said, one of the other, I mean, people should go listen to Tulsi's intro. She brought up Russiagate, and she said, "Hey, they tried to imply that Trump was a Putin bot, right? And that was illegal." And then she brought up some of the details. She said they used the Steele dossier.
Yep.
And it came from a Clinton guy. I forgot the guy's name, Chuck something or whatever. When we come to find out that it came from a Clinton, they lied and said, "Oh yes, it came from some Russian Kremlin insider." And then we find out that the FBI, shortly after they got it, they looked into it. They found that it came from this drunken bastard who worked at the Brookings Institute, a man who had, alcohol addiction problems. Shall we be kind to the poor gentleman? And when they talked to him, he said, "Well, I didn't think anybody was lying, of course. I didn't think they were going to use it for anything. It was just drunk bar talk." He says, "And I got it from this guy named Chuck something or other." And the guy was like headed the Clinton, the Hillary in 2016. This guy like headed Hillary Clinton's campaign for Virginia. So when it came down from it, the so-called information in the Steele dossier came from this guy, Chuck something or other, who was nothing more than a Clinton operative. Knowing that, the FBI took that, hid it from the FISA court, pretended like they thought it was real, and used it like 17 times to get warrants. My point is this. She kind of sent a message. That bullshit is not going to go on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That will be dealt with, right? Because it was like they used, and I'm thinking to myself, well, Jake Sullivan got to be sweating because he's behind it. But my point is this. It was interesting because she went at the machine. There was people in that room that was a part of that. There were people in Congress that was part of all that. Adam Schiff, for one, it was a part of all that crap, right? And she went right to the machine and said, "You bastards, look at all the criminality that's happened under you. Let me interpret it my way. You bring me in here to evaluate if I am right, if I am able to handle the intelligence stuff. When you are supposed to be an oversight committee and they committed criminality right in front of you, you didn't do your job as the oversight committee. I know all of this. This is easy to find out, and none of you have acted. You have not done a thing. You are actually, active participants in this criminality. How dare you challenge me and not vote for me and say that I'm not worthy to do this with your filthy records." That's my interpretation of what she said.
Yeah, she put him on blast. I mean, she really did. I've never seen a situation where a member was that bold in putting out truth, right? Like, because usually it's coded. Usually, one of the things that I actually do like about Trump is every random blue moon, he says something that's just true that nobody else would say. Obama got 500,000 people killed. It's like, whoa, I can't believe he said that. I mean, it's true. I just can't believe he said it. Or when Gabbard goes after Kamala Harris, right? And the people are like, holy hell, I can't believe she just said that. All of it's true. I just can't believe she said it. Or when she goes on Jake Tapper on CNN and she's like, "Jake, we're supporting terrorists. Jake, what do we, why are we okay with this?" And Jake Tapper is like, "The government says they're not doing that. The government says they're not doing that." Okay, well, obviously, it's true. And, at a certain point, it's that there's something awesome about somebody doing that, right? Like, she brought up the Jake Sullivan thing, where Clinton, was Sullivan Clinton thing saying, "Al-Qaeda is with us. Like, these are our people." She read it into the congressional record. And you're like, whoa. Again,
how about this?
I just can't believe
this is big. I mean, she came in with a pair, buddy. She came in with a pair, right? This is one of the biggest things she said. She said, the guy who we put in charge of Syria right now, was an Al-Qaeda guy who danced in the streets and celebrated 9/11.
Yep.
Right now, he's in charge of Syria. We put him in charge right now, and he's an Al Qaeda ISIS scumbag who danced in the streets on 9/11.
Yep.
I know they were like, oh God.
But see, that's what I mean,
my
right?
God.
It's
I
perfectly
was
true.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, somebody came into that
Man, I was
upper chambers
applauding.
and said, yeah.
Because she's saying, it's like for all of the talk of ISIS, all of the talk of Al Qaeda, all of the talk of these people being terrorists, and then for us to work with Turkey, work with Israel in order to put that terrorist in office. Okay, that's astonishing. And if you were a member of our military and you were fighting because of supposedly terrorism in the Middle East, especially if you're talking about ISIS and everybody else who we were fighting, supposedly. Okay, that's pretty outrageous to then back a jihadist as they take over the mechanics and the machinery of the country itself. That is astonishing. Anybody that was in the military that was fighting in Iraq, in those locations, and now you turn around a few years later and you see this eventuality, you should feel some kind of way. She is an active soldier. I mean, she is like in our military now. And so, what does she think as a soldier who was over there deployed to Iraq, seeing that the US government has turned around and said, oh, by the way, now we can use these terrorists in order to affect our political agendas in a geopolitical sense. So yeah, we're going to use this terrorist in order to knock over the government of Syria.
And you know what? It's interesting. She actually used her position. She says, I'm a lieutenant colonel. I command a division.
Yep.
I was over there fighting. I went in because of 9/11. I'm like, I'm going to go in and fight for my country. She's like, imagine my shock and horror, paraphrasing, when I found out that a guy who danced on the streets the day they did that is now in charge of Syria.
Yep.
Right. And I know they're like, oh, the neocons are like, yeah, but we put him in. He's our guy. You're screwing up our whole foreign policy. The issue is this. They're looking at her saying, if she becomes, because, with Biden, they come in and tell him everything, anything, what's happening? Oh, all good, Joe. Just here, eat your ice cream, right? And your oatmeal, go for a walk in the rose garden.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, shit, she's going to come in and tell Trump the truth.
Yes.
When Trump sits down and says, I need my intelligence, bring my intelligence director, tell me what's going on. She's not going to say, well, according to Ukraine Pravda in the Kiev Post, the Russians have got 100,000 North Koreans fighting now. She's not going to say that. They know good and damn well that she's going to walk in and say, Ukrainians are getting their ass kicked and they're losing this. And what's the point of 100,000 young Ukrainian men dying for nothing? That she's going to say that. I'm not saying she's great. She's perfect. Certainly. Could I pick her apart? Could I pick RFK Jr. apart? Certainly. But these people came in and said things that you looked at and you're like, I ain't saying either one of these are perfect, but somebody needs to say that.
Agreed. The RFK thing is another good example. RFK's campaign, look, Kash Patel is another one where it's super weird. Very rarely do I have a situation where there are people who I'm like, oh, that's a good choice. Or at the very least, that's an interesting choice.
Yes.
It's different than this kind of orthodoxy that I have issues with. And so when Patel comes in and he's skeptical of the Ukraine stuff, I'm like, hey, that's good. He's skeptical of it. He should be skeptical of it because the stuff is nonsense. They make it up. Or when he's like, the intel overreached in regards to the way they were dealing with Trump. Gabbard says something similar on that. I'm like, good.
Yes.
That's good. I would prefer, I appreciate that. I don't like the yes man stuff that I get out of Patel, but fair enough. RFK Jr.
But let me say this, but you knew and Trump made a point that he got backstabbed by Joe Bolton and all these stuff. So I guarantee when he came in, everybody that he said, look, guys, if you're going to be I need you to be on my back. If you ain't on, because last time I picked people who screwed me. So I'm sure they know, Trump, you got to continue to reassure him. So I know they got to come out and say somewhere in there, I back Trump 100%.
Yeah, it's like we're going to back our guy. JD Vance was a choice like that. And it's funny. Initially, people were like, okay, JD Vance was a horrible pick. At this point, I think JD Vance is like a Trump whisperer. I think he has the ability to articulate stuff that Trump wants to say in a better way. Like, meaning he puts it in a much better way as opposed to Trump, who's kind of all over the place, scattershot. RFK, he ran a weird campaign. But I mean, there are 2 points. One, with his level of popularity, if they would have let him run an actual campaign in the Democratic primary, he had a chance to win that. I mean, he's clearly brighter than anybody else that was on the Democratic stage that was running. He clearly understood the issues better than pretty much anybody else that was running. My issue with him is that his campaign made zero sense. Like, how on earth are you going to be the sycophant for Israel, where, you know, it's like that brave soldier murdered a baby, where any and everything that happens in regards to what Israel does is fair game. Palestinians are pampered and etc. I mean, just lunatic stuff. And yet he's like, but I'm an anti-war guy. So it's like, you're anti-war, but you're okay with the genocide? It makes zero sense. So the people that would have been on his side in a primary like that or in a race like that thought he was insane. Me being one.
Other than that, he'd have won.
Other than that, he might have
I
won.
believe he'd have won. I know someone who was a close confidant of his, and I talked with the guy and I said, you know, if he does that, if he takes that position, he will win. And he's like, yeah, I know. I tell him that. But I don't think it's an accident, whether it's Kash Patel, whether it's Tulsi, whether it's you ain't even getting in the door if you're not, you know what I mean? This is a Zionist empire. If you ain't pro-Zionist, you ain't even walking in that door. They'll probably, you know, throw you into a vat of sharks if you don't. So it's sad, but it's a true fact that, you know.
No, I accept that. It's just
and we don't like it. But that being said,
but that being said,
your thoughts about how the Democrats just made monkeys of themselves, be like, hey, I'm here for Pfizer. Make sure you tell me that you would never sue any of these, but Merck or Pfizer or one of these Johnson and Johnson. And I'm like, wait a minute. You know,
Elizabeth Warren is humiliating.
Arbitrarily say, even if I uncover that they violated the law, because there's all kinds of pills they put out, medicine, they could bribe people. They could have something where, hey, this birth control pill, we find out that they already knew that. There could be anything that he could find out. And for him to go in there and just say, oh, no, I would never hold them accountable if I find a crime that I don't know exists now.
How bizarre is that? Yeah, how bizarre is that? I mean, what, like, his main point about vaccines, they're like, oh, he's a vaccine denier. No, he's not. The man is actually fully vaccinated himself. His issue, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he even got the COVID vaccine. His issue has more to do with this idea that vaccines are given this kind of special dispensation in our laws where they don't necessarily have to, like, meaning if a vaccine does something egregious, they can't be sued for it. Like they're in this kind of special space. And he's like, this is insane. Why will we allow any drug to be in a space like this? And if you allow a drug to be in a space like this, what is the incentive for them to ensure that the drug is safe? You can't sue them for it. So this is like, this makes no sense. And his point is, okay, these things should be tested like any other drug. This is problematic. This is outrageous. Why are we behaving this way? And why are we giving this kind of magical perfection to these pills? Like, it's almost like, you know, these are magical. There's nothing at all wrong with them. It's 100% flat. It's like, okay, dude, you're trying too hard. It's like you're working far too hard to put some kind of cover on this stuff. What is the issue of these things being interrogated like any other drug would be interrogated if indeed you're right and these things are safe? It's that. I don't get this other stuff where they're like, you know, all of the ideological stuff that they heap onto it. It's a science question, yeah or nay. And it was the same thing with COVID, right? Where they were locking his account, saying not that what he was saying was false, it was just unhelpful. And it's like, okay, dude, are you serious? The man is being true, the man is being correct, and your issue with him is that, well, this is unhelpful right now to our narrative of events and our causes. No, we spend trillions more than any other government on healthcare, and we live 10 years less, something to that effect. And so it's like, that is deeply problematic. Like, how do you end up spending all of this money on supposedly healthcare, meaning something that is supposed to keep people healthy, keep them living longer and everything else, and yet when you compare yourself to other industrialized nations, you live less. We die sooner. We have more illnesses. We have more diseases. And it's like, in their mind, it's like, yeah, but, you know, Are you going to really pressure those companies? Yes, I'm going to pressure those companies. Those companies should be pressured. If something is going on when you find out we're dying younger because of X, we are getting less bang for the buck in our healthcare because of X, you should know that. It is the job of Health and Human Services to figure that out. You would want, or ideally would want them to figure that out. And for whatever reason, you get people like Elizabeth Warren, it's like, but he's going to bankrupt vaccine makers. Okay, Warren. Okay, Warren. So how exactly he's going to do that? He's going to bankrupt them because he's going to find something that they did wrong and, go after them for doing something wrong. Like, it makes zero sense. I am perfectly okay. In fact, if I'm being bluntly honest with you, I love the fact that they're terrified of him. I love the fact that those corporations are scared of him, that the sugar manufacturers are scared of him. I love the fact that all of these companies are like, oh my God, he is, the doom bringer in regards to our companies and our industries. Yes, he made the point very clear. Health and Human Services should be run in the interest of Americans, not in the interest of corporations. It's not about their profits. It's about American health. I agree with that premise.
And here's what was interesting. He said, they said, are you going to cut Medicare? And he says, did Trump tell you to cut Medicare? He told me to make Medicare better. And that's what I intend to do. Did he tell you to cut Medicare? Are you going to cut Medicare? He said, wait a minute. Only Congress has the power of the purse strings. I can't cut Medicare. You're the only ones that can cut Medicare. You know what I mean? And they kept coming after him with just stuff like that. Are you going to cut Medicare? Are you going to do that? And then he said something like to the effect of people, most people, a lot of people in this country. Oh, he talked about COVID and he talked about the number of deaths that we had. And he said, look, a lot of our deaths were disproportionate. We have 4% of the people in the world, and we had 16% of the death. He says, and scientists over and over, they did all kind of studies, and they said it was because of chronic illnesses that people have, right? And he said the average person that died had 3.8, or high blood pressure, diabetes, things like. Now, here's the thing: the man had numbers. He came in there with numbers. He gave you a percentage. He gave scientists said this, they studied this. Here's the numbers. So I'm taking a position and I'm going to give you the numbers to show we need to do. And they came after him. So I'll say this. I used to do healthcare stuff for seniors. And there were these healthcare programs for seniors. And what would they do? They had these silver something where if a senior wanted to join a gym, they would pay, or they had like agreements with certain gyms. If you're a senior and you have our plan, you can go to that gym anytime you want for free because, like United Health will get some big, they give whatever Gold's Gym, they give them $1 million or whatever. And then anybody in that plan can do. Okay. So he's saying basically what some of these services already say. If I'm covering you, it's cheaper if you're healthy. So you can go to a gym or you can do this or that. Now they cover chiropractors. They cover a lot of other stuff they didn't cut because it's cheaper to go to a chiropractor than do back surgery. Things like that make sense. So he's saying that, and they're coming at the man because he's simply saying we need to deal with chronic illnesses, high blood pressure, diabetes. And I'm thinking, well, that's the Democrats. And I'm like, no wonder you only got 31% of the people.
Yep.
You don't sound like you're standing up for the people.
Yep. It's like, how are you upset with that? Like, how are you upset with that position, right? I've seen him do this kind of rundown of the number of childhood illnesses, childhood diseases, the increase and the spikes in those diseases and illnesses in our populations. How are you upset with that? Like, it's just astonishing to me. And I kept thinking, like, as I watched them, I kept thinking to myself, they think that they look good here. They have to, because otherwise they wouldn't do it. But this looks horrible. I mean, like, you are going after the guy because the guy says he wants to cut down on the number of childhood illnesses in our population, and that he's going after corporations because the Health and Human Services has been basically corporate captured. And the Democrats' position is, that's outlandish. How dare you? What do you mean, how dare you? The majority of Americans already believe that and agree with that premise. The healthcare guy got murdered and the public applauded. It's like, why do you think they applauded? If you believe that people are this ginned up for the orthodoxy, then the Democratic Party would have won. So, and they did not win. And they're sitting at a 30% approval rating. Something needs to change.
Let me give you another story. I don't know if you've discussed it yet, but I think it's a huge story that we need to talk about. I've seen a number of articles, and I'll throw it at you like this. I just saw an article that says Denmark has now worked to given a certificate to Gazprom to start working on Nord Stream. That they've hired somebody, like, we need to go plug this. Perhaps there's a little rust on there. We need to, get some sandpaper and swim down there, maybe shine it up a little bit, right? And then I'm reading that, oh yes, they've got a gas disaster, and they're running out. The prices are going through the roof, and like the Russia haters are like, perhaps we should maybe look in the direction of Russia. Maybe a little bit of gas flow wouldn't be the worst thing. And I'm like, they're feeling the pain. There used to be this advertisement for football, and it was this guy that played for the Buffalo Bills named Bruce Smith, and he would chase down the quarterback, and they would say, he's hearing the footsteps, hearing the footsteps behind him. And I'm like, they're hearing the footsteps. And I'm like, damn. And then I read that some of them said, well, perhaps if Trump gets a deal with the Russians, then maybe he can include this little gas thing, and it's like, man, they are up against it. Your thoughts on what does that mean to you? What does that say to you?
Bruce Smith was number 78, right?
I think so. Yeah.
God, I don't, just random memory about stuff. I have no idea why I know that.
So I think he was from Tidewater, wasn't he? Wasn't he from down Virginia Beach way?
Now that I don't know. I just remember, I know it. Madden. Do you remember the football game, John Madden?
Yeah. Madden 2000 and all that stuff.
Yeah, they used to have the number written under the guy when you're using the guy, and I think I used to use Buffalo at one point. So I guess there are 2 points. I don't know if Denmark is, and there may be two things going on at the same time. One, I would imagine that Denmark feels some kind of way that Trump is trying to steal Greenland. So there's that, right? It's this tit for tat.
Norfolk. He was born in Norfolk. I thought so.
Oh, was he? He was born in Norfolk. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they may feel some kind of way that he's trying to steal Greenland, and this might be, I guess, a tit for tat. I'm not quite sure how that's a tat on that.
I think
especially since
I think it's pain. I think it's pain.
And that's the other element. Pain.
Read the numbers of the prices going through the roof.
That's the other element. If Donald Trump is saying, well, we're going to end the war, and Denmark and all of these countries are like, okay, well, we've been deindustrialized by this war. I mean, God's sake, they've been carving Germany up in this war. And so you think to yourself, all right, so if he does end the war, why are we standing out here when we have this good resource that we can get our hands on cheaper? So I don't know. That might be what they're thinking. They might be thinking that they can just get back around to business as usual at the end of the conflict. I don't know, though. I don't know how that works. I agree with you. Pain is real. I mean, but Putin has said it over and over again. He's like, dude, one of the pipelines still work. We can always cut that pipeline back on. You only just have to cut it back on. This is not, rocket science per se. So yeah, I guess I think you're right. It is pain on some level. On the other one, I think it's the Trump effect.
One thing about the Russians, and this, we both work with Russians. They're very practical, extremely practical, right? And I think the Russians, the Putin, a lot of people would probably think, oh no, they hate the Europeans. They'll never sell gas.
No,
if the Europeans are paying for that gas,
they'll sell it.
The Europeans got cash. They're going to sell it. Now, I imagine at some point the Russians are going to say, we want some money back for some of the things that we happen. You're going to have to give us all of our money that's locked up and all. I mean, there may be a price to pay of some type. You know what I mean?
They'll sell them that gas.
They're going to have to eat some crow, but they will sell them the damn gas. You know what I mean? They have to use it to cook their crow pie with.
He'll sell gas.
Let me ask you this because the last thing, because we'll get ready to go. Trump, and as the Russians put it, wants to revive Star Wars. Trump says, I want an Iron Dome, right? We want to do an Iron Dome around the United States, right? And I thought to myself, well, how well did it work for Israel?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I mean, here's the fact of the matter. We have no air defense technology that can stop hypersonic missiles.
Nobody
The
does.
Houthis fire hypersonic missiles into Tel Aviv at will, one at a time. They don't try to fake them out, they'll fire one hypersonic missile. Every one of them hits. There's nothing they can do. So at this point, there is no Iron Dome. I mean, that's like a name. It sounds great, the Iron Dome. It is not even a cardboard dome. So it's, what the hell? What is Trump talking about? Building an Iron Dome. Tulsi Gabbard, I guess, will be so sensible enough. Somebody's got to say to him, dude, you ever heard of this Oreshnikov, whatever the hell missile it is? Yeah, we got no defense. We can build an Iron Dome, but it will be like, we might as well make it like a plastic mock-up. You know how like during World War II, they would make these wooden tanks and stuff, and they would put them out to fool the aircraft coming up. Yeah. We might as well make like a wooden plastic mock-up of air defense systems and put them all around, because it will be just as valuable as putting whatever the hell air defense we got, which can't stop anything.
And we have Patriot missiles. I mean, like we are giving Israel their batteries. Like, what does he think? Like, look, 70% of what Israel was using for that genocide, we paid for. So this notion that Donald Trump is like, we need to get technology that we've given Israel already. Okay, dude, it doesn't work that way. And Israel was effectively using that Iron Dome to go after, like Hamas, non-state actors for all intents and purposes, whether it was Hamas, whether it was Hezbollah. These are not peer militaries. Like, these are resistance groups, if you want to call it that. When they dealt with a actual military, you saw what happened to Iron Dome. Iranian missiles went through it like butter, right?
Exactly.
Couldn't stop it. And the Houthis are firing those things, like you said, willy-nilly, just I bet they're coming down at hypersonic speed.
Video Hamas had a while back. You remember that? Hamas flew this drone in to Israel, and it like flew all over Israel, took video of like all of their spots that they might blow up and all this kind of stuff, and then flew back. And I'm like, what kind of air defense system do they have? So I'm just saying, their air defense system has some holes in it. And you're going to build an Iron Dome. I don't know what you're going to supposed to be protecting ourselves from.
By the way, the Patriots do too. If you remember, the Houthis? Yeah, the Houthis, when they were going after Saudi Arabia. When Saudi Arabia and the Houthis were going back and forth. And they flew, I think it was a drone fleet that ends up taking out 5% of the world's oil by hitting Saudi Arabia's oil fields. And, at that point, Saudi Arabia was flipping out like, what the hell? How, these missiles weren't doing the job. The Patriot missiles or the Patriot battery wasn't necessarily doing it. Patriot missiles are far more expensive than S400, S500 at this point. I think they've upgraded it. And yet they're not as effective. No air defense is perfect, right? But the idea that Donald Trump is talking about Iron Dome is nonsense. It's the weirdest in the world. Like, look, it's one thing to be up Netanyahu's ass. It's another thing to go that far to get there. It's just bizarre.
Now,
it's so bizarre.
Let me take another perspective of it, because I don't always take everything that Donald Trump says as, oh, I'm going to do this. Well, there are other reasons. Here's what I think. Now, I've been thinking about this. That we're going to Mars, right? All this kind of crap, right? Okay. I thought about this a long time ago. Let's say Garland came in as president, and I said, we're not going to go all over the world doing all this crap. We're not building all of this military, spending all our money, right? Lockheed Martin and Raytheon would get together, and they would have a fight over who got to kill me. No, I'm killing him. No, it's weapon season. No, it's duck season. They'd have one of those Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck arguments, right? Well, they kill each other, figuring out who got to kill me first, right?
Yeah.
And my point being is this: you'd have to find a way that they still get their money. It seems to me that the people, Trump's like, hey, I'm going to call Xi and say, come on, let's do some peace together, bro. It seems to me like some people in power, the tech bros, they're worth trillions, have said, this crap ain't working. We're all going to get hit and we're all going to get nuked, and we're too rich to get nuked. Let's take another plane. Seems to me they're going in another way. But if you say, but look, how are we going to do this? Because Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all of them, they still got to eat, man. There's no way in the world that we're going to be able to contract in like this and stop doing all the things we're doing all over the world, and they don't get their money. They got to get their money. What do we do? Okay. We'll tell them they'll build an Iron Dome. That'll give them hundreds of billion. They'll be happy with that. And we'll say we're going to Mars, how are we going to get a person on Mars? It's, for God's sake, they'll be dead. If radiation half the way, but that's not important now. We'll give Lockheed Martin and the Raytheon, General Dynamics, will give them the contracts for Mars. That way we can contract and they won't fight us with it. They won't push back with all their think tanks and all of their lobbyists. They'll stay cool because they're still going to get their money, and we'll give them some, let's call them busy work that they get paid hundreds of. But that's my other thought too. What do you think of that? Is that outlandish? Is that unreasonable? Over the top?
I suspect that Donald Trump is serious about the Iron Dome stuff.
Yeah. But I'm saying,
I can be wrong.
Raytheon makes it, right?
It's busy
yes,
work.
He is.
Yeah.
Whether it works or not, you still get to funnel money. You always got to funnel your money to the military-industrial complex, no matter what.
I don't want us to funnel money to the military-industrial complex. I mean, we spent $10 trillion on those two wars. Like, they are fleecing this country in regards to the amount of money that they are able to suck out of this country like some kind of parasite. And so it's like, you think of what we could have done with $10 trillion. Instead, we decided we were going to use it to blow up Afghanistan, blow up Iraq. We no longer control Afghanistan. Iraq hates our guts. And we have been into the Middle East for God knows how long. And you think to yourself, okay, well, what did the American public get out of that? How many Americans were killed in that process? Not to mention, how much money did we spend in order to get nothing out of it? I mean, we spent the last, 20 years just murdering people with these drones, flying killer robots, and to the tune of like 60, 70% of which were civilians. Like, this is not a positive outcome. And so I get that the money is going to be used for something. I do not want that money going into these kind of defense contractors in the way that they've been going. They have lived very well, and they've lived very high on the hog at the expense of America. That needs to come to an end.
Yeah, I think basically, here's the way I'm putting it: it's the ultimate bullcrap pork project. It's the ultimate pork project. Something that is not going to work, and you only do it to placate them. Because let's face it, what have these companies done? Like, every member of Congress, they put a little factory at least in every one of their districts so that they can bribe each one of them. So in reality, you'll never get anything through Congress to do the things you want unless you placate these people, because they kind of own, you know what I mean? So I think it's placating, it's bull crap, it's pork project. It'll never work, but I think it's the game they're going to play. Maybe I'm wrong. They got to know it won't work. They're not stupid.
I know, but their existence is a pork project. I mean, like the way they function and operate. We spend $1 trillion a year on military. If I'm not mistaken, like half of that money goes to paying people, like in regards to the people who are on our staffs and everything else. But if you think of a huge amount of that money is fully in the black, meaning we all, like many respects, we have no idea what they're even spending that money on. They just assume that if you're spending $1 trillion, that you have this kind of amazing military to go with the $1 trillion. Okay, the F-35 only works half of the time. And if you think of the amount of money that they spent on the F-35, there were other scams where the people will charge, ridiculous amounts of money for like little nuts or little screws and all of this other stuff where they can just inflate the cost of it. Because again, we have no idea what we're spending our money on, in the sense of the bang for the buck that we're getting or the return on investment, and whether or not that stuff actually is suitable to a current battlefield, as opposed to, hey, let's just put money into this airplane. Let's put money into this other random thing that we're now going to do. Oh, let's do a Star Wars project and let's try to build missiles in space or lasers in space. Like, they spend all of this money. And, it's like, when is the last time the Pentagon was audited? When it was the last time they passed an audit, let alone audited at all? I would argue that most of that stuff is a pork project. It's just outrageous. Like, I feel you on this. You might be right that it's like, all right, we need to find some way to spend money, because otherwise these people are going to be pissed off if we don't find some way to spend money.
But one last thing before we go there is one last thing, and you are the person that I need to ask about it, because all people, you'll know. What a lot of our viewers and listeners don't know is that this man is in fact a software engineer.
Used to be, yeah.
Yes, he was a software engineer. You know where I'm going? DeepSeek. DeepSeek. Oh, what a story.
DeepSeek.
But let me add one more thing to it. I'm big on timing
Yep.
because I was an investigator. Timelines, right? Well, what do you know? Donald Trump becomes president, and within 6 days, they released DeepSeek and they nuked the US AI, the whole AI program, the whole AI everything, NVIDIA, they nuked it 5 days after Donald Trump became president. I think they're throwing elbows. I think it's to let them know, look, don't think you're coming at us with this technology bullshit. Because if you do, you're going to lose. We can talk, we can be friends, but if it's going to be a technology war, you ain't winning this one. Oh, by the way, here's an opening salvo, just in case you needed a reminder to let you know what we could do. Pow! Right in the kisser. You know what I mean? It seems to me the timeline says that. But anyway, you're being a former software engineer, you would understand the significance of this that I probably wouldn't. If you could explain what the real significance of the whole DeepSeek thing.
Yeah, $1 trillion was wiped off of market share, almost like overnight. Just astonishing amounts of money that basically went up in smoke when they saw DeepSeek. Because the reality of it is, OpenAI had like $100 million or some insane amount of money that they were effectively getting in order to kind of build this stuff. And so the belief was that you need NVIDIA chips. Basically, you need high edge everything. It's going to be an energy guzzler. You need all of these talented programmers and engineers, and you need all of this other sophisticated stuff in order to make this work. And then China does a decent facsimile of it for like $10 million. I don't even know if they spent $10 million.
Basically, Trump had just said he was going to put $500 billion in that, didn't he? He said $500 billion we're throwing to get it done, and they did it for like the price of an apple pie.
Yeah,
I mean, comparatively.
Yeah, in comparison, I mean, if you're talking, it's like 10 times less, if not more. And they've been able to get something that is very similar to the technology. And the way I think one of the best ways I heard somebody explain it was in this kind of thing, the difference between a mainframe versus a PC. It's like if you are at a high-end, cutting-edge research company, you may need a mainframe. But most people get by with laptops, get by with PCs. They don't necessarily need this kind of super sophisticated thing. It was the PC that was able to effectively take over everything in regards to the way we deal with computers. And they were making this kind of distinction between, like OpenAI and some of those other systems, these kind of larger language model systems. DeepSeek is kind of like a PC in comparison to this kind of mainframe that these other things are. The reality of it is, though, most people only need a DeepSeek. And, they were able to do this in this kind of really creative way that didn't necessarily have the NVIDIA chips. They didn't have this other stuff. They were able to train their system using these other larger systems in order to get something that was somewhat of a facsimile of the larger system. Basically, it did what you needed to do in a limited, somewhat fashion. It did well. And so the catch becomes, okay, well, what happens when they improve upon this proof of concept? Like the fact that they were able to get something like this on the cheap, what does it look like when they start to scale up in regards to the amount of money that they spend on the technology and the capabilities of that system and the sophistication of that system? Okay, well, you have something that could easily end up in the hands of some of everybody. And what's wild about it too, they made it open source. So you can see how it's working. You can see, what it's working, and you can effectively use it with all other sorts of technology that you may be able to code against. So if I'm a coder, for example, I can use a system to code against their system in order to get information and kind of incorporate their system into my own system. And again, because it's open source, you can effectively see what they're using and how they built that particular system. That is astonishing. Like OpenAI, it's not going to give you the secret files, the secret sauce. Like, you're not going to see that. That stuff is behind the scenes. That stuff, because they paid hundreds of millions of dollars in order to get that secret sauce. DeepSeek is like, here you go, have at it. Enjoy. This is, I heard somebody make this argument of saying this is a difference in methodology, this kind of communist versus capitalist way of looking at the world in one sense. And to be fair, comp sci, a lot of it is more communistic. And I don't mean that in a negative, I mean that as a positive. Like this notion of you build something, you can share it with pretty much anybody because you're not necessarily losing any money sharing something. And oftentimes many people want other people to use that technology. So I build a software application, I put it on GitHub, anybody can use that application, they can improve upon it. And you can kind of expand technology out that way with a lot of the stuff just being free for other people to use. And so that was kind of the way DeepSeek was working with, the way it wasn't expensive. Anybody could effectively get their hands on it. You can use it on a regular computer, regular laptop. It doesn't even have to be a sophisticated system to be able to use it on. And it's astonishing. Like I got to be honest, how they train this is fascinating to me. Like this notion where they have all of this information and then they somehow keeping this stuff in databases where they're looking for, okay, what is the percentage of the next word? What's that next word most likely to be? And then somehow come up with a sentence that makes it look as if they're having a conversation with somebody. It gives this kind of appearance of understanding. There are more hallucinations, from my understanding, in DeepSeek than some of the other large language models from something like OpenAI. But that's because of the way it's trained. It's not, these aren't equal systems. It gives the appearance.
When you say hallucinations, what does that mean?
Oh, hallucination. I mean, like it would state something very clearly. Like it would be like corn on the cob was made by Bob Cobb in 1945. And it's like, it says it very strongly. Like it's very serious about it. And it's like, okay, this is not true. Right. Nobody named Bob Cobb made corn on the cob. Like it's stuff like that where like, but all systems do that. All of them, even OpenAI do that. It's just the amount to which it does it. But again, the system is not meant to be mainframe. They built this on the cheap, and they built it almost like a proof of concept to show that they could do something. They can build something this sophisticated that gets you 80, 90% of the way in regards to what most people would necessarily.
And it's pretty much free, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much free.
Yeah.
So, hey, what the hell? If I get a hallucination every now and then and it's free, and the next guy wants a fortune for it, everybody's going to take I mean, that's the thing that screws you.
Yeah. Well, that's why they lost $1 trillion in market share.
How does NVIDIA come? I mean, they nuked NVIDIA, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. $1 trillion in market share. It basically went off the top, like almost immediately when DeepSeek came out. Because again, if you are bullish in the market and you are saying, oh, I believe in this, OpenAI is the next thing. This is a new frontier. This is where we're going to make all of this money. We're going to invest in drones. We're going to have checkout counters that are automatic. We're going to have cars that are going from point A to point B. We're going to have drone swarms. Like they're seeing money, like dollar signs in their eyes when they're looking at this. And OpenAI being the forefront of this, they're thinking, okay, this is the bleeding edge of this. And then DeepSeek comes out. Then what do you think? Like, meaning what do you do as an investor? When you think to yourself, your entire conception is this costs hundreds of billions of dollars. This may be billions of dollars that we have to spend in order to make this work. And you find out that these guys do it for $10 million.
You're out.
What do you do with that?
You're out. You're selling. You're getting out of that stock as quick as you can.
That's exactly what they did.
For whatever you can get for it. It's like, but I can only get 10% of what we invested. Well, it's going to be worth nothing soon. So take 10%. Realistically, you got to take anything you can get. Well, and NVIDIA sells all these high-end. The other half of it, I think, is you've got what the software is. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you got the hardware part where these people. So there's the software and the people that are doing whatever they're doing with it. Okay. But then the other part is these people saying, in order to do this, you're going to need these unimaginably powerful chips and processors and all these things.
Yep.
Now, who the hell needs them?
Well, that was the whole thing, right? That we were going to get China on an AI thing. We're going to prevent them from getting access to the chips that they need in order to build AI. So we're going to be able to get this kind of dominant position on the issue of AI. Okay, well, they've shown ingenuity, competence. And what it put me in the mind of, do you remember during the space race where NASA spent $20 million for an ink pen that can write upside down? I actually bought that ink pen. I used to have it where you could like write upside down with the ink pen. They spent $20 million to build that ink pen, and the Soviets ended up using a pencil.
Right.
It was far more simple, less complicated. They didn't have the money to spend on it. So it's like, okay, what's the most simplest solution that we can use in order to make this work? Like, it's like the limitation creates the incentive for what's the word I'm looking for brilliance in that moment. And the same thing is true for this. It's like, okay, we may not have the chips in the moment. We're going to have to rebuild these chip factories and everything else. The U.S. is trying to freeze us out. How can we build a system that gets us most of the way on the cheap without the technology that they may have in the West, meaning this kind of expensive high-end technology? They found a way to do it. And by the way, they are going to make a killing. They're going to make a killing off of it. Especially if it's the PC analogy is right. Where, okay, OpenAI is going to have this high-end, NVIDIA is going to have this high-end stuff, but the majority of people are not going to need something that high-end.
Right. You know, it reminds me of the U.S. was like, we're going to build all these expensive fighter planes, and we're going to use it to take Russia out. And Russia said, well, we can't afford to build as many planes as you, so we better build some focus on anti-air craft and air defense systems. Well, the Iranians, you're not going to be able to get anything. The Iranians said, well, we don't have a lot of aircrafts. I know, we'll build missiles and drones. And what do you find out? You can't defend against the missiles and drones or the anti-aircraft. So you create a dynamic where the person can't do, you know what it reminds me of in Iraq? Now, a soldier who was there told me this story. He said they went there. He says, and what you had was you drive along, they call this roadside bomb. When the phone call hits the bomb, it makes it go off, right? Okay. So they put on these blockers. So you're going along in these cell phone blockers. So now they call the bomb and it's connected to the phone. When the cell phone blocker comes along and it breaks the signal, that makes the bomb go off. So now your cell phone blocker gets you blown off, right? So they said, okay, so they figured a way around that, right? And you know what the Iraqis did then? They tied a piece of fishing line to the bomb. And the guy standing 200 yards away with a sighter, and the guy would say, all right, yank it. And he'd yank it, and boom, they'd blow it. You know what I mean? And it is no matter how much technology you have, eventually they yank out a fishing line. You force the person through trying to prohibit what they can do into a smaller space, and they got to work in a smaller, but they end up having, it's like, look, I've got to accomplish this task, but you force me to have less to accomplish the task, which creates me having to do more with less. And ultimately, this has not worked out. Well, like I said, they nuked our AI stuff, and who knows what's coming next.
That's an understatement. I mean, that's an understatement. When you lose like $1 trillion in market share, that is not like that. Like I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, dude. Well, I think we've gone long enough. Certainly appreciate it. We had a great time. Everybody, if you're watching right now on Jamarl Thomas's channel, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And if you're watching on my channel or whoever sees it in the future, make sure you subscribe to Jamarl's channel, because Jamarl is going to have he has a show every morning, Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. And like I said, he's got Sloboda, he's got Ritter, he's got Glenn Deason, he's got Ted Rawl, he's got all kinds of great guests. So I watch it every morning. People, I don't know, between 9 and 10 most of the time, every now and then. But you know, it's something to do in the morning and get going. Thanks a lot, Jamarl. Any last words before we head for the hills?
Oh no, man, I appreciate it. JR Shield, thank you for the new membership. Really appreciate you joining me. But no, man, 7 a.m., 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. Definitely appreciate you guys. Enjoy, man.
Same here, everybody. I do have a join button, so we get a couple people here and there. So everybody, please press the like button, subscribe, and join. And of course, share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much.
Have a good one, my man.